thing.
Hello, and welcome to our broadcast on integrity versus opportunity, navigating ethical dilemmas in business. I am Bryson Bort. I am the founder and CEO here at SCYTHE, and I'm joined by Robert RSnake Hansen. Robert, if you'd like to give your bio introduction.
Sure. I am Robert, and I'd say about half the internet knows me better as RSnake, so I go by either. I've been in computer security for almost 29 years now. I'm coming up real fast here. And I started some companies, some websites like hackers.org back in the day, for those who remember. Wrote like Slow Loris and found exploits in the Nanera Red Star operating system browser that the North Koreans use, and all kinds of crazy things like exploits using the censorship system against itself for the Great Chinese Firewall. And Solaris was used to take down leadership websites during the Iranian Green Revolution and all kinds of stuff. So real heavy on the red team hacker side and research side. Later on, I started Bit Discovery and sold that to Tenable. Most recently, I wrote a book on AI. I have a podcast called the RSnake Show, and I started a fund with Jeremy Grossman and a couple other founders called Grossman Ventures.
Full disclosure, the co-founder of Tenable, Ron and Cindy Gula, are founding investors in SCYTHE.
Well, we won't talk shit about that.
Ron, Cindy, we won't talk shit about you. So for me, I was an Eagle Scout in Boy Scouts. I was a West Point graduate, which is probably, I think, probably is the most famous honor code on the planet. Cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, nor tolerate those that do. And they added that, and that's why I love this idea that you and I came up with doing this webcast, because the idea there is not only that you yourself don't hold yourself to the level of integrity you're supposed to. When you witness something that falls short of that integrity, you too are responsible and liable for calling it out. And while, of course, we, for various reasons, are not going to get particular about names, we are going to talk through a lot of the ethical concepts and some things that have come to public of late. So I guess the cue to that, Robert, is going to be the Gilly-Renan model, which has been covered in the press. Why don't we talk about what that is and why we are talking about it today?
Yeah, so I think probably the best way to explain it is how I experienced it, because I think a lot of people think I just kind of came out of nowhere and started talking about this, but that's not what really happened. Two completely different groups of people at two completely different times reached out to me as during RSA, and we were talking whatever, and they both independently mentioned what was happening. And that was very surprising because I had no idea that this was going on, none. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of such a thing, which I'll get to what the thing is in a second. But they were talking about it like it was kind of well known or something, or that they had maybe come across it or something. It was just, it seemed super weird that I was so behind the times on this issue, right? And so fast forward a couple of weeks, and one of our LPs, he's like, you really need to read this thing that I found, or whatever, or that people has been going around. And he's like, read it twice. Make sure you really, really read it. And I'm like, okay. So he sent it over, and it was this obscure link to this website called calculustech.com, which is an Israeli newspaper. And primarily, I think it's only a couple of people who work there, but primarily they do like investment research and who's the big player in town and where are they spending their money and what sort of Series B or Series C they're spending on whatever different companies. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of like like red herring was back in the day or something, but just all online. So on this article, they mentioned several things that were interesting. Number one, the allegation, and who knows if this is even any of this is true. So I have to be very, very careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and specifically accuse anybody of anything. But at the same time, I think at least directionally we can talk about this as if it were true, or talk about it more hypothetically, I guess. But the specific allegation that these two reporters made was that there was a pool of money, a sort of a dark pool of money set aside as a kind of a pretend GP, a general partner in the fund. So let's say they have, I don't know how many GPs they have, but let's say they had 4 GP slots, and each one representing 5% of their carry. So you get 5% of the upside of the fund in each one of these GPs. Let's say they had 3 GPs as actual humans. 1 would be set aside to hand off to other people. And that is normally not how that works. Normally you have a bunch of LPs, limited partners, that put their money, personal money in, and they get upside if something happens. So the allegation was there is a point system that they apply to CISOs for advice or for giving feedback or something. It's not exactly clear, as part of the Sunrise program is what they call it, which is their sort of creating a new company kind of program. I think they're trying to market that as a unique thing or something, as if like other VCs don't do, on like creating companies. It's kind of a weird way that they phrase it, but the idea would be if you have a whole bunch of CISOs who potentially are advising these companies, and they're incentivized to advise these companies, that the companies will do better. It will grow over time. Now that's, I think, pretty much all fact, approximately, or close to it anyway. I don't think I've heard anybody say definitely not happening. But the problem with that is, and where it gets more into allegations and less like pretty probably true, is are they even giving advice? Is there anything really happening there, or is it really just a pay to play model? Is there a bribery scheme in place, or they're just giving money if you buy the product, if you're a chief information security officer? So I don't know if that's happening. I really don't know. I don't have any direct evidence of it. So this is where it diverges from what we know versus what I hear, right? And what I hear is a lot of things. So I don't know where you want to take this conversation. We could talk about some of the polls I did, or some of the allegations that have come subsequently. And we could take this conversation in 100 different ways.
Well, why don't we start with, so why does this happen is, I think, 2 parts. First of all, congratulations. Cybersecurity has grown up into an industry, and industries with success bring all sorts of interests and incentives to get to that success, because there's a lot of money involved, which lead to the second, which has been the incentivization system in the cybersecurity startup VC funded ecosystem has been a little out of whack. 2022, when the capital markets changed, was the first correction we saw to obscene valuations, unrealistic valuations, and now that's a little bit back more to earth. But that leads to a very simple exponential math of $100,000 contract can be worth $3 to $5 million in valuation. And who wouldn't immediately be interested in that kind of math? And so I think that's the incentive structure that we're looking at it. So what other incentives are there? And then case examples, I think, doing that.
So there's a lot to unpack just in that, even that very tiny little thing. But so let me start with the first thing you said, that, congratulations. Like Plato and Aristotle and those guys, they had an idea of what governments become when they get perverted, like over time. They start with all the best intentions, and then they gravitate towards something else. Like pure democracy as opposed to republic turns into the mob, for instance. Well, what we've created is an oligarchy. And the problem with oligarchy is they create self-dealing. Like there's all like everyone's trying to like make money at the top and all the people at the bottom suffer, right? And that's pretty bad if it's true, right? I mean, if that's what's happening, if the CISOs are just going to buy whatever's on the back of the truck, I'm not saying they're doing this, but I'm saying if they're going to buy whatever's on the back of the truck and they don't care what's on the truck, then what we're talking about is a deflation in first of all, the role is almost pointless because they're not actually using these products in some cases, or if they are, they're worse products. Their employees don't like what they're working on. They're more likely to leave. So you have a slow brain drain. Plus you get more sycophants and more corruption within these companies. It's almost like you're actually making the whole company worse. Not to mention the fact that CISOs who've taken money illegally, let's say, are much more likely to take more money illegally or to try to protect themselves. And in the process of protecting themselves, they might be much more vulnerable to blackmail material where nation states could get involved and whatever. And I spoke to one of the guys over at the Pentagon about this, and he says he agreed. This is absolutely a national security problem. So if that's the case, we've created a real cluster. If this is widespread at all, if it's even happening at all, but if it's widespread in particular, then what we've really done is we've opened up a massive Pandora's box in terms of the amount of corruption that could be used to greatly weaken national security. And that is the thing that actually upsets me more than almost anything. I mean, as a VC, as somebody getting into this space with our fund, I obviously have to worry, like if I pick the perfect pony, it is absolutely the right purchase, right? Everything's great about this company, right timing, right market, whatever, but they're up against a company that is bribing CISOs. I'm not even going to get invited to the room. There's no way this portfolio company is even going to get a fair chance at all. They could win the RFP, they could come in under budget, they could be perfect in every way, and they'd still lose. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, although not direct evidence, that things like this are occurring. A $600,000 check going to the guy's wife in a numbered overseas account, $1.2 million in equity for this CISO woman to kill a deal and switch over to the other one. And this kind of data is just pouring in. I'm not even asking for it. It's just like, oh, Robert, you should find out, go talk to this person about all this information. So the way that this could be happening is more than just the model that was mentioned in the calculustech.com article. There's so many different ways this can happen. So some of the more obvious ways are just direct cash payments, equity, advisory boards that are paid. So you have to be on them, but you get paid, but you're not really doing anything. You just get money or equity. Obviously consulting where the advice is not necessary, like just don't even bother giving us any kind of deliverable, don't make any meetings, and we'll just continue to pay you. Something I see fairly regularly is a title, kind of a made up title, CISO in residence at VC firms like Rest Invest, just hang out and make money, presumably helping with security, I guess.
Hold on, wait a second. Someone's going to say with a straight face that startups take security seriously at the beginning.
And then, so I think those are the sort of the more common ones. Another one that I've heard that was not mentioned in the Calculus Tech article, it was actually one of the very first ones I heard from those guys that came up to me at RSA, was that there's VARs who are directly paying. So that way the VCs stay away from it and the portco's hands are clean, sort of. But the actual agreements are between the VAR and the CISO.
So there's a kickback model between the VAR and the CISO?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And I'm not exactly sure the mechanics of it, but the way I've understood it is a certain amount of something, whether equity or cash or whatever, is delivered to the VAR for the VAR to hand out for these sales. So it's sort of set aside to sweeten the deal and make it more likely to go through. So, and there are some names. I have some names on that as well. So I actually believe that one to be probably true. In fact, I believe most of this is probably true, but it's hard to prove. So then another version that I've heard that is, I'm not exactly sure where this falls in the illegality kind of realm. I think it is illegal, but it's really difficult to know for sure. And I'm not a lawyer, so how would I know? But so like, let's say you're having a birthday party for your kid or something, and Shakira just shows up. Well, you can't buy tickets to that. It's not a thing that, there's no direct money that you had to, like, there's no one else that can have it, let's say there's like a private backstage thing at some big sporting event, and I get you in, and it's this crazy lavish thing that, from my perspective, might have cost $100,000 for the Formula One drivers to show up, or for the sports, the football player or whatever to show up and meet and greet, whatever. But from your perspective, there's no way that you could have bought a ticket to that thing. So the value is zero. And so from a reporting perspective, it's like, do you need to report something that isn't worth anything? So that's much more difficult, I think, to prove that there has been compensation. And then the other one that I think is also unclear is, let's say you wanted to be a VP, so what am I saying? LP in my fund. And let's say it was a $100 million fund and you wanted to put $1 million in. Just to make the math super simple here, let's say that's 1% of carry, even though that's not really how that works, but let's just say it was. Then you would owe me $1 million, paid over tranches, usually over like 5 years or something. And that's how that would work typically. But what if I said, look, I'll just give you 1% of carry, but you only owe me, half that or something. So is that discount worth something? Do you have to report that discount? Or what if I give you for free a pass to not have to pay me anything, but you pay me out of carry, which means there is no risk to you and you just make money. So I'm not exactly sure how to describe that from a legal perspective. But one would surely say that something of value has transpired, right? There is some intrinsic thing that happened, even if it's a deferred payment. That's still something of value. A risk-free investment where you only see upside and there is no possibility of downside seems like value to me. And the three pillars for bribery, just so people are on the same page, because this is not something most people have to think about. But number one is something of value. And I think we can say some percentage of carry is something of value, right? Two is there any expectation of a quid pro quo of them getting something for that money? So in this case, buying said Portco's company's products, right? And that's really hard to prove, right? We don't have any evidence that I've seen of that. A lot of anecdotes, but no proof. And then the third one is the CISO in a position of authority to make this decision? And because of how corporate bribery is law, there's one other hurdle, which is a little bit more tricky. Have they told their executive team, and has their executive team given the thumbs up? If yes, then actually there isn't much problem here. If no, then there's a massive conflict. And even still, they should deconflict themselves and step out of the meeting and not have certainly not be the one deciding this product over that product. So that's a pretty high bar. But I think you would say that CISOs do in fact have signing authority in many cases, or they're directly influencing product decisions. The only question is, do we have proof, verifiable proof that this is happening? And so that's where the government needs to get involved. That's not something that private investigative stuff is going to necessarily net out, because what I've found in the last couple of weeks is everyone's very, very scared of CISOs. They're scared of them for potentially very good reason. Let's say they're scared of them because they're trying to sell to them if they're a vendor. They're scared of them because, if let's say you're in my position, you're scared of them because you're not going to buy my portfolio company's products. You're not even going to let them in the room. Employees are scared because they might get fired or sued or whatever, not get a good reference, right? Not get promotions. There's a lot of risk for employees. Journalists are afraid of them because there's a lot of chance for libel, and they really would like to not have their livelihood taken away from them. So since there is only speculation so far and not a lot of hard fact, this is a very, very tricky thing to write. I'm surprised calculus did it, to be honest. So I think what and the acquirers, in the case where a company eventually acquires one of these portfolio companies that has grown through this, through a bribery scheme, let's say, they don't have any incentive to go, oh, mea culpa, we messed up, because are they going to tell all of their investors that they were asleep at the wheel and they didn't really look at the numbers and really dig into, is this product real? Are these customers real? Do they really like the product, or is this just all bribery scheme? It doesn't make them look competent. And I don't think any of these executives are going to want to wave a flag and say, yeah, we've outed corruption, but also we're incompetent, right? There's so many disincentives for our industry to self-police that this is just something I don't think we're ever going to get in front of without the help of some sort of law enforcement that goes in and says, hey, I'd like to take this case over.
So in the example, the Calculist article, which we're going to post here shortly on the stream, they referenced an Excel document that had 82 names tied to explicit payouts, right? That was what I believe that raw source. Now, how they got their hands on that, right, and the veracity, that's where we'll put that to the side. But I believe that's where they felt the confidence in that. At the start there, you referenced this as an oligarchy, which implies an uneven balance of power and haves and have-nots. So you talked a little bit about the impact, but I think this is often the challenge when we talk about white collar crime is who's hurt by it, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that. What is the impact? What is the hurt? You mentioned national security, but let's make it personal. Who gets hurt by this?
Yeah. Almost every single person on the planet gets hurt by it, which is really a kind of an amazing thing. But at the same time, I think you're going to find next to impossible to find somebody who wants to raise their hand and say, I was personally hurt. But let's walk through it. Yeah. So certainly I've run into vendors who say, we've lost these insanely huge deals. And they'll give me very specific, detailed information about who, when, where, what, how the deal was lost. They won the RFP. They came in cheaper. They're better in every way, basically. And the other product didn't even work in their environment, and they still lost the deal. This product doesn't work in Azure, and all they have is Azure. And so why would they purchase that product? Well, it turns out they're on the advisory board of said company. And there was, quote, an obligation to purchase. So that would be an example. If I'm a vendor and I'm in that space, me trying to sell my very valid, good working product that will absolutely solve your problem. Another example I heard was they lost a deal. This was a privacy related deal. The whole project was just about privacy, and they lost the deal to a company that is certainly in scope for this conversation. And it turns out that company has absolutely no privacy features at all, and yet they won the deal. So that's the kind of thing that I think you can start hanging your hat on. If the RFP said it had to be one thing and you did exactly the opposite, I think we can probably say that is really a real thing, and not just some vendor who's hurt that they didn't get a deal, or some sales guy who's pissed he didn't make quota or something. Because there is some of that. You really do have to pay attention to what their motives for talking to me would be, right? So that's one group. The VCs are another group. So a couple of VCs have reached out to me very quietly, we don't really want to be involved in this. But yes, this is absolutely hurting our ecosystem. We are losing deals. Our portcos are losing deals. And cry or don't for VCs, right? I can understand why people would kind of go, who gives a crap? But the problem is, if the VCs don't feel like there's money to be made in the industry, then what you lose is innovation. And if you don't have innovation, then we're stuck in the status quo of the existing products and features that are out there. And I just don't think that's good for anybody. So like VCs or don't, feel free to hate me if you want, but I think that they're, especially the good ones, and there are some really good ones out there who actually care and really want these products and services to be out there and make a difference. They are not going to be able to do that job effectively, and it's going to hurt them, and you're going to see a lot worse products making it to market. So then you have the employees. We mentioned them before. So I ran a poll and asked, are you more likely to leave a company if you believe that the CISO is on the take? Not saying they are on the take, but if you just believe it, right? If they're on this list, this 82 person list that Calculus mentioned, would you be more likely to leave? And a huge majority, I think, I forget the number now, but something like 70% said, yeah, I'd bail. Which means what you're left with is all the sycophants or people who are not particularly smart, who are just going to go, yeah, it's okay. Yes, me too. Let's just go. Let's do whatever the boss says. Or people who are purely corrupt. So there's a growing rot within these companies, and that rot can take many terrible forms. But once you have corruption growing inside the most important security functions of the company, anything's possible. You know what I mean? Like if the only people who are stopping all the bad thing from happening are just money motivated and not particularly interested in protecting their company, man, what kind of harm can they do? It's incredible, right? It's really damaging. And all the good people wouldn't even necessarily know what's happening because they bail right away once they saw these kinds of crazy things happening, where they're forced to work on products that literally cannot work, or massive amounts of shelfware that are just sitting there in a closet and you'll never deploy because you can't, right? Or it was ineffective or whatever. And I've heard quite a few examples of this. And examples where they were compromised, by the way, eventually. So had they spent the money instead of shelfware on a thing that might have actually stopped the breach, like that could have saved a lot of people who were compromised in the breach. So the end user is the next beneficiary of this horrible thing, because if what's happening, and this is all speculation, but you can just draw lines between all this stuff. If there is bribery scheme going on in any shape or form with any of these companies, and the CISO says, I don't want the right product, I want the wrong product because I'm incentivized, and that product leads to breach, and that breach impacts individuals, that individual is all tied together with this massive bow of all this corruption. So that's certainly one. And then the national security one is obviously a really big deal. And as I said, the Pentagon has already weighed in, and they are pretty annoyed by the situation. So because the companies we're talking about are not small companies. This isn't like some mom and pop jam company or something. This is like, you've heard of next to all of these companies. I mean, there's a couple that they're obscure, but I was going down the list of companies that are directly tied to CISOs who advertise the fact that they are part of the advisory boards of these companies, and they're all really, really large, and many of them are very important companies. And some of them financial, some are regulated, some of them are state related, so like even more regulated. And those types of bribery laws, by the way, are different than commercial bribery laws, much more stringent typically. I know people will kind of balk at that statement and saying, hey, Robert, there was this Supreme Court ruling where they said bribery is legal as long as you do it after the fact. Well, first of all, that's not really true. That only applies to one state. I forget, like Illinois or something. I forget where. But secondly, that was a state law that they were referring to, not the rest of all laws everywhere. And third, it's easy to fix that law because that law was actually kind of ambiguous. I actually agree with the Supreme Court on this one. The wording was not great. So it's easy fix if the state just says, no, you're not going to do that anymore. And bribe includes bribery after the fact. So I think we can kind of safely say the intention was there, and it just needs to be fixed at a state level, and that will be cleaned up. But either way, I mean, we're talking about this impacts CPGs, consumer packaged goods. This impacts, every kind of retailer you could think of, and stuff like food, and just like the amount of bad things that could happen by virtue of allowing a blackmail scheme to get injected into these companies, if any of this is true, or worse yet, even if the CISOs just feel it's true, even if it's not true, if they just feel like they've done something wrong, then they're much more likely to be blackmailable. And that's where governments, foreign governments can, or our own, anybody can apply leverage to those people and do bad things.
So I'm going to respond to the comment you made about the impact to the employees with two personal stories that I've seen. And I believe what ties these both together is, time and time again, when we look at employee satisfaction, buy-in, what makes somebody want to work somewhere, it's that they feel valued. And when you are working within a corrupt system, you're effectively playing on a chessboard that does not value your inputs, because that's not the board that you're playing. And so the two stories that I've personally seen, one, I would say put more on the corrupt side. The other, I think, is more an example of some of the other challenges with these. And you go through evaluation. And in the first one, the evaluation was already cooked. Everybody knew it. And the employees had to go through it. And whatever they outputted was overruled, and it didn't matter. So they basically did about 4 weeks of worth of work. At some point figuring out that anything they did had no value, but they had to complete the checklist exercise anyway, and it didn't matter. And I can tell you that entire team quit after that. I personally witnessed it. They went over somewhere else. The second one was, I think, more an example of you see more middle management in these places that don't necessarily have the authority, or think they have the authority, or the authority changes, or they're not managing their stakeholders properly, and they go through a similar exercise, and it also comes to naught. And you have a similar result where you've just spent a lot of time to something that has no value. So what can we do, right? What should be the consequences? What are the consequences? We talked about liability. Certainly there's the potential for liability that either that corrupt product, if it had a vulnerability, now directly contributes to something, or because it doesn't match and it was shelfware where it could have minimized impact to a breach. That certainly ties in a public company to shareholder equity and liability. And then with that, there is one public example we do have in the space from 2021 where a Netflix vice president of IT operations did this and was convicted of bribery. So we do have a public case example of government response.
Mm-hmm.
I know I said a lot.
No, it's not a matter of the amount of words you said. It's what to do about it really depends on who you are, right? If you're the government, obviously this is a great place to start fishing, right? If you have the ability to have direct insight into the buying habits of, a huge chunk of the Fortune 500 and beyond, that might be politically expedient and interesting. And I could easily see government agencies looking at this like a big juicy steak, not just from a like making their name perspective, which certainly a massive RICO case would be interesting. Not just that, also the visibility, because a lot of these state governments, and this would likely be driven by a state, not by a federal government, although there are federal agencies like SEC, even stuff like Secret Service, postal inspectors, post office, and FCC, because of wire fraud reasons. Even weird agencies might want to take a look at something like this, but I believe it'd probably much more likely to come from a state agency, because that's going to be an easy place to build a nexus, both of people who've had something happen to them or not made the money they were supposed to make, or suffered damages in some way, A lot of the CISOs are based in, a select handful of regions, a lot in New York, a lot in California, for instance, Florida, Texas, where I live. And so I think that's one thing that can happen, right? Some sort of investigation, and I think that's going to have a chilling effect of some sort. I don't know how effective that chilling effect will be or how long it will last. If I were a CISO engaging in this activity, I would be extraordinarily concerned right now, though, like really, really concerned. And even if I'm totally clean, but I've been involved with one of these companies, I'd still be concerned, because what's going to end up happening if they get down this path is they're going to go through a lot of discovery anyway. And so I would probably start distancing myself from anybody I thought would drag me into the mud. And I think that chilling effect right there will have quite a bit of effect as more and more CISOs realize what's happening. Because I'm not sure all of them are completely on the up and up, or completely aware of what's really going on under the hood, because there's a lot happening that people aren't talking about. So that's one. Journalists are the second. And the problem with journalists, like I was talking about before, is there's just such a huge chance of the scandal being discredited on any one random issue. Like if I say X is true and Y is true and Z is true and one isn't, like that's all it takes for somebody to go in and say, it's obviously not true because look, I can prove this one thing's not happening or whatever. And so once you have anything wrong in an article, the whole article gets thrown out wholesale. And apparently in the Calculus tech article, there were at least a couple of discrepancies, according to a couple of people I know who are very familiar with those people and the situations. And so are you going to throw the whole article out wholesale? Well, they didn't say the whole article was bad. They said parts of it were bad. But that sort of discrediting is something that I think journalists are very concerned about, especially professional journalists that really need for big newspapers or big publications. They really need to do this correctly, and any sort of transgression or miscalculation could end up being a libel suit, and they really would like to avoid that, especially if they were to actually publish all 82 names. Let's say they got the hold of that list. Whew. Can you imagine? But there are definitely more than one set of journalists working on this. I've heard of at least 4 now, different groups of journalists that are looking at this, including the Calculus team, who might go back and do another article on it, subsequent article. So that's the next group. Then the third group is the practitioners and people on the ground, the buyers, the people working sort of low-level jobs in these companies. We get to decide who we work with as well. Like we also have buying authority. We also make decisions. And if we're looking around and we see very strange behavior, I mean, it's very easy to call it out or to not purchase from that company. And I've heard quite a few situations now where deals have fallen flat because they are closely related to the scandal or a very similar looking thing, even if it's not that, because the allegations are that there is more than one VC doing something kind of similar, whether it's this model exactly or something kind of kissing cousin to the same idea or whatever, right? It's all potentially bad depending on what exactly has transpired, if anything, right? It's all allegations. And so a couple of people have approached me about like other things, like what if we created an anonymous call-in tip line where you could just call in and rant for a while, and it just got into a registry somewhere. But I think people are wary of that. It's difficult to set up and maintain, and who's going to be on the other end of the phone call, and people don't want their voices associated with it, et cetera, et cetera. Another version I've heard, somebody wanted to create a website, and that website would be sort of like this person did this horrible thing on this date, time, blah, 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 blah. But the problem is that would be pretty easy to decloak who the people were, because who was in the meeting, who would know about this. But the idea on that website would be then it would trigger an email to their executive team to go investigate, like, is this a hit piece? Is this, totally legit? Or is, what's the status on this? So there's a lot of things we could do as an industry. The only thing I think is happening that I see currently is I've seen a number of deals like not go through that would have gone through. Very, very large deals, as a matter of fact, like acquisitions that just didn't end up happening as a result of this. I'm aware of at least one situation where a round of funding was not taken, another situation where a round of funding was not able to be secured. So they had to do some kind of supernatural things to make that happen. And a bunch of other weird rumblings of things occurring behind the scenes. So this isn't something our industry has ignored. The only thing that's happened is people have taken these conversations private. They're very, very, very wary of the ramifications of backlash. But sooner or later, it has to come out. This is one of those things, if investigators get involved, being quiet now, if you are aware of a crime, you have to be very careful about this, right? If you're aware of a crime and you didn't talk to the authorities about said crime, then were you an accessory after the fact, or were you just worried about, protecting yourself? Because there is sort of like a carve out for if you're worried about retribution, et cetera. And people hate whistleblowers. They really, really hate whistleblowers. I don't know what it is about, you think that people trying to save the world would be well respected, but that's not how it ends up playing out. And so, but at the minimum, behind the scenes, I think our industry can start to self-regulate. Now that we're aware this is happening at a grand scale, or at least allegedly happening at a grand scale, even if it's not happening, we can be on the lookout for it so it doesn't happen. But if it is happening, if that's a real thing and it's really affecting us in our industry, then maybe we should pay a lot more attention to how deals are getting done. Maybe we should have some accountability on top of these executive decisions that are typically made by fiat. Maybe there should be some level of transparency about the RFP process and how things were chosen that goes outside the corporate walls so they can't obscure it. Maybe this is where regulators start saying, hey, we're going to need a lot more information about why you chose X, Y, and Z, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's plenty of things that can be done. The question is, who is willing to do it? Where is the political will? Where are the victims that aren't willing to raise their hand currently anyway? And then if you can't find any of that stuff, then we're back into we have to kind of self-regulate. And so far, what we've seen is self-regulation leads to oligarchy.
So with whistleblowing, surprise, surprise, when you're doing something nefarious or wrong, you really don't like being called on that. And usually always everybody is doing kind of something, maybe not so black, but more gray. And so I think it's kind of the same thing we see in lots of different institutions where it's easier for everybody to just get along. While you were talking, I had a inside statistic sent to me where they saw a company that devoted 38% of their marketing development fund to basically be the slush fund through the VARs for selling. So I thought that was interesting to see an actual statistic. And you did mention it in the Schadenfreude that possibly some CISOs may be getting fired as a result of this. And so I'll start with the counter from Rob Terran. And he says, I will take the other side of that bet on a wave of unceremonious terminations. Probably fewer than 5 will happen, tying to the whistleblower comment. Mostly it'll get swept under the rug or continue in some even more opaque fashion, right? When we pick up the rocks, the bugs scatter and they find other places to hide.
I would not be surprised. And that's why he's exactly right. In fact, I hear that pessimism a lot, even from my own team. Like, what can we really do? Well, the thing is, I have to be careful about how I talk about this, because what I don't want to do is stray into speculation on any one company. So forgive me for sounding a little weird as I answer this question, but trust me, there's a lot of meaning behind it. So let's say instead of handing cash to a CISO, I hand out equity in a pool where there's 10, 20 people in the pool, let's say, and that pool increases in value because it's equity as opposed to cash, based on the amount of times those groups of people, that cohort of 20 people or so, purchase. If that is the case, then unlike a situation where I just hand somebody cash, it is now a situation where all people involved need to be investigated just to understand what the amount of counts of bribery were. And so if you have a pool of people, you have now created an organization where every action has to be scrutinized, and every crime now counts against everybody in the pool. So even if I only committed one crime, but somebody else did 20 crimes, I profited off of those 20 crimes. And that is where it stops being 5 firings to 20 people going to jail. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I am saying I wouldn't want to be anywhere near this bomb when it goes off. And so if I am aware of a situation where money is trading hands at any kind of pooling situation at all, I have to assume that the only reason that stays safe is that everyone is very, very, very quiet and careful. As soon as it reaches the public, as soon as it gets out there, then I'm totally at the whim of a prosecutor who decides to go after me or not. And that is just not an enviable position. I hope that kind of answers that question without answering that question.
We have to walk a fine line on this one. It's the risk of being spicy on a unfolding situation which has some opacity itself, and without verified evidence. And this is where the courts really come in.
Actually, let me add one more quick point to that. Let's say they go on a fishing expedition and they go and they find virtually nothing because they've done a pretty good job of hiding it. But let's say in the process of looking at all those 20 people, let's say in this hypothetical example, any one of them has committed any other crime, all of a sudden they have a lever. And now it's like, well, you're going to go to jail, like forever. Like, we're going to put you away for as long as we possibly can, unless you tell us what's really going on with the rest of the 20 people. And suddenly that one person is very heavily incented to do the right thing. And so if you get a large, you can't, it's like, you really can't do crime with that many people. It's one of the reasons the mob never really worked long term. It's because there's always one rat. There's always one person willing to stay out of jail and turn state's evidence for everything that they need to make the case thereafter. That's why RICO works, really. You have these accelerated sentencing and whatever. So if I was involved, I would be running, not walking, to the nearest prosecutor to turn state's evidence and get some immunity, because you sure don't want to be on the backside of that deal. You know what I mean?
Okay. So short of, if you're doing something wrong, go turn yourself in.
That's my advice. Don't feel free to ignore it.
Yeah. How do you want to wrap this up? What are the closing thoughts behind the call to action there of go talk to the prosecutor now?
I think the way I'd leave this is there isn't a way for responsible investors to be completely deaf, dumb, and blind when it comes to the way that these companies make money. Because I know, as an investor, and having had other investors in my companies, they want to know these things. They want to know, like, what's your sales pipeline? Like, how are you getting these deals? Like, why aren't they closing? And, what's working, what's not working? Like, how do we get you in touch with better customers that are mostly closely matched with what you're trying to do? Like, who's your ideal customer? Let's work together and workshop, like, how you might change your product marketing and whatever. If this is a bribery scheme, then, and I'm not saying it is, who knows, right? if it is a bribery scheme, though, it would be shocking to me that all the other investors involved and all of the deals were completely unaware of this happening. So the blast radius, if this is indeed a real thing, is truly enormous. Like, this is possibly the biggest case I've ever heard of, if indeed it ends up being investigated. And therefore the counts just keep growing and growing and growing and growing, if you get my drift, right? And the people involved grow and grow and grow to the point where this is going to be one of those watershed moments for corruption, period, not just in our industry. And I don't think this is one of those things that people should just sweep away and go, oh, okay, it doesn't impact me. It definitely impacts everybody who's listening to this, for sure, directly, and a lot indirectly. And I'm not the bearer of bad news. I just think that everybody should be aware of how very important what I'm saying is. And you don't have to mark my words. Something may never. It's like, who knows? Like, the investigators might go, nope, not interested, or this is too complicated a case, too many moving parts, or too many people. It would be really hard to take a crack at it, or whatever. As you said, maybe I'll take out like one or two, just make it easy on myself or something. Maybe. But I am saying the potential is enormous. And when I talk to people who care about these kinds of things, they look at it like you'd look like a tiger at a juicy steak, And so I think that's what I'd like to leave people on, is a nice sense of,
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there is enough money to bring that attention.
I think so.
Well, Robert, very much appreciate your time here today. And
Pleasure.
Again, what was in fact the spicy conversation we built it to be, and I think we're going to market this afterward, is how to stay out of jail in cybersecurity.
Yeah, just don't commit crimes, or if you're gonna do it, be good about it. Be really careful, because
no, let's not go down this path.
No amateur hour here. No. We're an industry of investigators. We're all like perfectionists and OS gods. Like, we're gonna find shit, So yeah, whatever. We'll see.
Again, thank you so much, everybody. Yeah. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm just going to leave the studio, and maybe that's how we'll end the cast.
All right. Well,
all right.
take it easy, gang.